hour. Unfortunately, tonight, minus the cocktail, visiting with colleagues and friends and people out of the industry that I may or may not know. And tonight is incredibly a great honor for me, a great pleasure for me, a pianist, a musician, and artist that I've admired for many, many years. Our paths have crossed in various directions. We've never made music together. We know so many of the same people. And without further ado, may I just say an incredibly warm, wonderful welcome to Garrick Ohlsson, the distinguished pianist, coming in from San Francisco. I'm in the south of Austria. Welcome to the land of Zoom. If there's any faint silver lining to all of these dark clouds over the last 4 months, it is opening and understanding of a new digital universe that everyone's much more comfortable embracing, both you as a public and certainly us as an artist. In these interviews is to have a bit of a cocktail hour and a conversation, put names and faces and ideas and voices together with extraordinary artists and extraordinary careers. And for me, it's going to be a lot of fun because we've never had a great chat, but our pre-chat already showed that this may be volume 1 of, a 10-week series. Garrick, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Thomas. Lovely to be here. Thank you for your warm introduction. And I'm equally honored and amazed to be talking to be you yourself, because I've heard you so many times, as I told you, on a couple of continents by now, and a number of coasts in a number of different countries. And you're there, you're here, you're there, you're everywhere. It's fabulous.
Well, we both are. I mean, looking at your schedule, and of course, right off the bat, apropos schedule, you are one of the most traveled, busy, to look at your discography, to look at your schedule, to look at your project list, which I really want to get to in some detail tonight. When was your shutdown? How long has the shutdown been? How are you progressing? What has the last 4 months been like for you?
Well, and just anecdotally, I was in New York to do a concert at the 92nd Street Y. Mm-hmm. And on Thursday, we thought we were going to have a Saturday night concert. And by Thursday evening, we knew there would be no public allowed. So the Y decided to do a streaming recital.
Oh, and cool.
I may have been one of the very first who did that.
They
got the equipment and all the video and microphones and cameras. So we did it, and we got a tremendous response because the streaming recital idea was quite new then. And I think
absolutely.
I think by the time, within a week or something, we had close to 100,000 viewers or something. I may be exaggerating. It was just incredible. So, and then of course I had another concert at the Y the next month. So at dinner afterwards, we all said, well, this is rough, but we'll see you in a few weeks. And of course I went home to San Francisco the next day and haven't gone anywhere since. And as you know, San Francisco shut down more strictly practically than any place in the country. And it seems to have relatively well worked out because apparently the case and death rate here is, shall we say, way better than average in America, which of course is.
Well, it's hard to keep track of all the various statistics. I didn't realize that San Francisco had shut down that severely that early. That makes sense. Everybody heard different stories out of California, and I think what dominated the media more was the catastrophe in New York that, in my opinion, Cuomo negotiated brilliantly. But various, the various cities didn't stay on. So you really have been, when they shut down, meaning you were in home. Could you go for groceries, or you had to wear a mask, or you couldn't go out at all?
We could go out. It was very unclear, of course, like it was for everybody at the beginning. We could go out. At first, we ordered groceries and had them delivered, but then discovered that everybody else was doing that. So after a week or so, I ventured out to the grocery store, and it wasn't such a terrible experience. You've got to make your choices. You be as careful as you can.
Yeah, quite.
And don't do extra things, and that's kind of the way it's been ever since. I go out, aside from the bad air days because of our recent fires. We go out for walks and stuff, and go to a hardly anything. Go. So,
well, there still isn't very much public music or public gatherings, are there?
No, virtually none. The sidewalk bars and restaurants are open. The indoor bars and restaurants are still closed.
Are still closed.
But people are sitting outside, and I'm wondering about that mostly as people are extremely young age. Said it's mostly much younger people doing that, and we don't do that. So
Well, the first messages about COVID were that young people were less vulnerable, and they've had to walk that back. And I think that it's been hard to put that genie back in the bottle. There seems to be everybody thinks they're immune because they're under 40. That's, you're, by the way, under 40, you're not immune to anything. I can remember under 40. You remember under 40?
What? You have to speak up. I'm the piano player.
Exactly.
No, but
you haven't been performing. Have you done any more online things?
I have done a couple of online things. I did one for the Tanglewood Festival. Tanglewood decided to produce a series of online recitals, which the Boston Symphony has on their site, and only for a limited time. And I did one for them. They were to have opened the new Lindy Center in Tanglewood this summer, but it didn't happen. And of course, I didn't go there to record. There are a few quite celebrated people who live in that neighborhood who were able to, transmit directly from there. But I did my recital at the San Francisco Conservatory in the wonderful concert hall there. So
now you're professor at you have a place at the conservatory.
Well, I guess I'm a professor. Thinking of myself as Herr Professor is really
Herr Professor.
But I've been teaching at the conservatory for 2 years now. I have only 2 students because, rather like you, I'm too busy to be in one place very often. But I feel, I've had so many great teachers. I feel like music teaching is a one-on-one experience that you cannot do out of a book, and you can do some of it online, but you're doing an incomplete amount of it online. But as we say, it's better than nothing.
What do when we were talking off air and coming on, one of your most famous teachers, mentors, was Claudio Rao, the great Chilean pianist. And you mentioned he was such a gentleman. He was so learned. He was incredibly well read. He was just an erudite, old world as well as new world, so forth and so on. How big a role does that humanities universe around what you play as concertos or chamber music, or even just to become a serious, I don't know, the serious silly question, but a serious professional pianist, how much is that humanities world that you so recognized and admired in Mr. Arau important? Do you communicate that too?
I do try, absolutely. I think it has an immense importance. I don't think you can draw a one-to-one relationship in the sense that, Mozart wrote his Saddest String Quartet while his wife they were having the joyous and uncomplicated birth of the first child, which was an incredibly joyous time. So it's not that a composer has a sad day and writes a sad piece and has a happy day and writes a happy piece. It doesn't work that way. So art does not function that way. However, Arau certainly embodied a person who knew not only all the music of Beethoven, Brahms, Chopin, Bach, Mozart, whatever, but he knew about the worlds in which it was created, something about literature, something about the feeling of the time, the drama of the time, the operas of the time, and the operas that, say, a composer like Chopin or Mozart, well, Mozart wrote operas, Chopin loved operas. It was just this rich world, and I was very fortunate. I think I had studied with a woman I'll call a disciple of his before him, and she really opened the door, because at the Juilliard School, as wonderful as it was, we didn't really have time to get into a lot of that. It was encouraged. The humanities were very encouraged at Juilliard, but we didn't have a lot of time to get into it with our famous teachers, who basically would be giving 30 to 40 lessons a week and at 58 minutes each, So you did with the métier of actually what you're doing. And so when I met Olga Barabini, who was a student of Arau, the first lesson I had with her lasted 4 hours. Involved poetry and music and a little bit of painting and physiology of how the piano works and how joints work and tendons and ligaments. And I mean,
That sounds like my first voice lessons. Exactly the same thing. Oh, absolutely. My teacher in Spokane, Washington, of all things, was a nun who had been given carte blanche by the church to become the best teacher she could, and studied, of course, with Lotte Lehmann and Charles Pansera and Maria Krenko. And so my first voice lessons were exactly the same thing. But my real question is, is that part, do your young people bring that with them, that curiosity, or do you have to slow them down and say, no, wait a minute, lovely etudes, wonderful touch, but actually it's about this?
Yes. Well, both. I'm going to say all of the above, because
Right.
some do bring it, some don't. Anybody who plays well and has a musical nature, of course, can always be developed in the various parts
Right.
of it, to a certain extent. But if they develop a passion for it, I try to help. I try to do the best I can, and I don't predict the result. But for example, I have one extremely talented fellow who, not at the conservatory, who's more mentoring with me, and I'm introducing him to singers and to works of music, and I'm trying to broaden the horizon. He's very susceptible and very bright and very able to receive. So that's very, very gratifying. I mean, I have a kind of an old saw, which you might understand and like, you will understand. When I listen to a musician or an instrumentalist or hear a conductor, I know whether they like or love singing. Now, it's not
Bravo.
something I can point to. Let's call it a sense of breath or line. But you can tell that for some very good musicians, music is about, more points on a graph or relationships. I mean, music is so complicated. It can also include the abstract.
Absolutely.
But if you could understand from a pianist's first gesture when they play a Chopin nocturne, that this note is an upbeat to that one, and the voice has to color itself. Let me give you an example, if I may. In one of my lessons with the great Arau, jumping all over the place, I was playing the Schumann F sharp minor sonata, and the second movement of it is short. It's rather like a short little aria with an ABA section. And I played the A section, and he said, "That's fine." He said, "Please sing it for me."
Wow.
And I looked at the great man. I said, huh? Sing it? He said, "Yes, sing it for me." So of course I probably went, he said, "No, don't hum, sing it." And he could see I was totally taken aback. So he said, "I'll show you." So he got up and stood in the crook of the piano like you would. And he didn't have any words, but he made a vocalese of it. He said, "Please play the accompaniment." And he didn't have
what kind of vowel? Just a vowel? Ah.
It was all ah. And he only sang about one phrase. His voice was not as good as mine, which isn't good, but you could hear the intensity of expression. And we talked about that. And he advised, he said, because singers have words also, but nevertheless, the way of the voice moves from note to note. You might warm up, or in other words, a true vocal concept. And he said very deeply, when you sing it that way, really trying to sing, and he said, you can imagine words if you like, or use the vocalese, but if you sing it with real expression, he said, then you're going to know most deeply how you would like it to sound.
Right.
And then you can try to imitate that on a piano, because a piano can only imitate singing anyway. Right. We don't have any sustain. But I mean, that's really something. And then he, with his gentle good humor, he said, "My dear, don't do this when anybody's listening. It's a little embarrassing."
That's fantastic. But at the heart of that, what I respond to as a singer is, and you probably do too, when you say when you feel somebody, they make music you can tell whether they like singing. For me, I didn't really put it right in my box as like singing, but whether they breathe or not, and whether the music is a head thing that they're recreating, or whether it's, I really want that to, and there's a handful of conductors that are, my mentors like Savalas or Hanan Kua or whatever, that was just probably, I remember Savalas, I was having a conversation, he had stopped conducting, he was quite old. I was visiting him in his house south of Munich, and, I admired and adored this man. So, and he told me, names shall remain anonymous, he told me that a rather well-known youngish conductor was coming to work on XYZ with him. And I had worked with this rather well-known youngish conductor. And I said, to him, "Oh, I'm so glad he's coming down. It's really fantastic that he would come down and work with you." And the piece, I said, "But Maestro, Herr Professor, perhaps you can convince him that breathing is a really good thing. both working with singers, but just in general when you make, and Savalich got the most intense, serious look on his face and looked at me and he said, he does not breathe, in German, atmet nicht. And I said, he's of course atmet, otherwise he'd be dead. Of course he breathes, but he doesn't breathe to make music. Ja, das erklärt einiges. That clears up a lot of things. Anyway, so okay, we've said. By the way, in terms of digital concerts, one of the reasons we're talking is that you are about to give a marvelous concert on. And ladies and gentlemen, if I may, IDAGIO.com is of course the most extensive, deep database of classical music built for classic music and by classic musicians and curated by classic musicians. The user interface of IDAGIO.com for classical music is all about how it should actually function and read. The templates or user interfaces of the monsters of like Apple and Spotify, as great as their catalogs are, and this is not a criticism, but you and I well know that sometimes the moderato doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's after or before the andante and the third or fourth movement, whatever. It doesn't work like that in classical music. So you can really trust the user interface first and foremost. The depth of the catalog on idagio.com is extraordinary. This program, Idagio Live, was sort of a midline thing that came in, or a mid project that actually is more the front end of what we hope to become a learning center on idagio.com. And it was born out of the COVID crisis because there just needed to be human contact in the world of music, both by musicians, for musicians, with musicians, and with our public. But very excitingly, in June, we launched this rather extraordinary project called Global Concert Hall. And the Global Concert Hall on idagio.com is becoming a really wonderful go-to platform for online performances that are produced, regardless of if it's 2 people or 200 people or 2,000 people, produced for the analog, meaning people sitting there, audiences at the same time and for the same purpose, as a digital public. Because like I said, if there's any silver lining to this COVID crisis, it is a broader acceptance and awareness of a digital universe where very exciting things can happen. Now, will the digital universe ever replace the real live universe of especially music making, especially classical music making? No, don't get me wrong. Can it augment? Can it keep energy together? Can it actually inform you? Can it widen your sense of repertoire? Can it build your own personal world of wonder in classical music? Without question. And one of the upcoming concerts is Garrick's concert. When is it exactly?
It's on Saturday.
It's this Saturday,
29th of August.
Right.
It will start live at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, because
Right.
I'm doing it from San Francisco, and we know that lots of people in the United States would like to tune in live, but it will be available for a week.
Yeah. Oh, good for you, because actually IDAGIO, usually it's a live concert available for 24 hours and it goes away. It's not a studio production. It's not a catalog. It really is a live event. I'm sure you are going to have your digital green room afterwards where everybody can ask you all the questions they've been wanting to ask you forever. Good luck.
I am going to be having a digital green room afterwards. Yes, I understood that leaving it up for a week is an unusual. Perhaps it's
it is generous.
Maybe we're trying it out. Who knows? I'm not in charge of those things, just like we often aren't. But I just said that sounds delightful, so let's do it.
This concert and this occasion we're talking has so many, it's the tip of an iceberg, because it's a celebration of Chopin music, for which you are completely famous and known, both in the historical context, and I believe remain the historically singular American who's ever won the Chopin competition. And this was back, in the beginning of your career. So I'd like to ask you just go a little bit down trip memory lane, but this concert on the 29th is this a direct anniversary of winning that competition?
Well, almost. I think it's 2 months short of me actually winning.
I must say, I don't want to embarrass you, but if I read correctly, it's 50 years.
Exactly right. It was 50 years ago, minus 2 months, but we hope to
Fantastic.
get to 2 months.
So tell us about first of all, where did this whole Chopin thing come from? I mean, that's such a silly question, but it's you probably get asked that before. Why was Chopin so important at that time of your life?
Well, there are many answers, and if you had a few hours, I could give some of them to you.
We have
But
all the hours in it.
I'm sure. Well, number one, Chopin is very important to pianists altogether because he more or less wrote the book. I don't mean the book on piano playing, but he developed the art of playing that instrument and the way of playing it and the way of using the human body to a degree that nobody had even conceived at that point. The piano was a developing instrument, and he sort of had a genetic receptor site, and the piano did too, and they just hit it. In the meantime, he wrote such great music, such powerful music, such poetic music that has driven the world crazy ever since, of harmonic, of structural, of poetic importance. And he became one of the world's favorite composers. So there's no mystery about that per se. Any pianist who's a good pianist has a relationship with Chopin, even if they're not a specialist.
All right. Okay.
However, the first great concert I ever heard in my life was the great Arthur Rubinstein. And I'm from White Plains, New York, which at the time was about 45 minutes from Manhattan. Now it's about an hour with traffic. So I did not realize how lucky I was growing up near New York City, near Carnegie Hall and then Town Hall. Lincoln Center didn't exist yet when I was a kid.
That's right.
And
Town Hall, great concert hall.
I had no idea that most people in the world don't have a city like that near them where they can hear the greatest things in the world all the time. It was just there. So I had heard a bunch of recitals by the time I was 9 in New York, and I was a 9-year-old kid, even if I was talented. So of course I thought they were too long and had too much slow music, because young boys like fast and exciting. But I was obviously very interested in this process, and my first teacher got a box at Carnegie Hall for a Rubinstein recital. Rubinstein in those days gave 3 recitals a year, all sold out at Carnegie Hall. Those are different times. And this recital was all Chopin. And
wow.
I didn't know whether that was good, bad, or indifferent. I just knew who Chopin was, and I knew I liked his music. And Rubinstein started. I feel like I can remember every note of the program, although I can't.
How old are you approximately this time?
I'm 9 years old, and Rubinstein is approximately 70. And in those days, he wasn't the 90-year-old man who you see on some videos, this great, generous, and still very good pianist. He was a lion when he was 70. He just raised the roof at Carnegie Hall. And I remember I'd never been so excited to hear anything so beautiful as all this. It was sold out, stage seats. He had a great presence. He wasn't like any other much less famous pianist I had heard in New York playing for 300 people. This was unbelievable. And he gave 8 encores, and the audience didn't go anywhere. And at that point, I knew that I just knew that that's what I want to do. And luckily, I wasn't nuts, and my parents weren't nuts, and my teacher wasn't nuts. So I realized that it's not very likely that one is going to play a Chopin recital at Carnegie Hall for a big crowd. Mm-hmm. But but I worked towards it. And I mean, I'm now fast forwarding the whole story, but everywhere along a line in a talented musician's life, there are many steps. And even as there are the competitions we don't even win and don't talk about. Everybody's got them, nobody has a straight line to the top, but it went really, really well. I was sort of like the horse that could always clear the hurdles with extra room. And by the time I was 13, I was at Juilliard, and so on and so on and so on. I could talk about that stuff too.
Unbelievable. What a story. And when the competition was in Warsaw?
Of course, it was in Warsaw, which
how long is it? A week long? I mean, is it just an exhaustive amount of repertoire?
3 weeks. And it's not an exhaustive amount of repertoire. This is what distinguishes the Chopin competition from all the other really famous ones. It's a mono competition. It's devoted only to Chopin. So it's not what I call, wow. And I say this with no disrespect, it's not a general piano playing Olympics where you have to play Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Schubert, Liszt, Prokofiev, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, all quite well. you actually have to play Chopin really, really well. And it matters how you play mazurkas and how you play nocturnes and how you play etudes. So it's a highly, highly specified competition, three weeks long, because it's incredibly fair. I think it's the only competition that's virtually never been tainted by scandal, happily. And the first round, everybody plays for half an hour. So since there were 90 people accepted at the competition, the first round took almost 2 weeks, because that's a lot of music, a lot of Chopin for the jury to listen to. And of course, I went and I listened to certain of the candidates. I didn't have time to hear them all, but of course there was a booklet, so you could see who had won what prize. So it's like a horse race. You kind of say, that was supposed to be, I'm going to go him, or I'm going to go hear her. And so you want to know what the competition is like and what it sounds like. The public, of course, it was sold out at the Warsaw Philharmonic Hall way in advance. Chopin is a national hero.
Yeah.
And a symbol of unparalleled national importance, really. Not unparalleled, other countries have it, but as one Pole said to me, until the arrival of the Polish Pope, if you ask somebody, who are the great Poles, you'd say, well, Copernicus and Chopin. And they say, now we have three. So
wow.
We're talking about world figures of the most incredible kind, because Poland, although not a small country, is not one of the big European ones are Germany, France, England, Italy, well, Spain too, I suppose, especially historically. Right. But Poland was, while important somewhat, was on the side, and of course was conquered and didn't exist for a couple of hundred years. So I mean, it's quite a story. So Chopin means a great deal as a symbol of his nation, but he was patriotic, and to say he's loved is a great understatement. I mean, I love to tell the story that the audience is so passionate that you'd be taking a walk on the street and some proverbial little old lady or man would stop you and say, "Mr. Ohlsson," in English or in French, usually in those days. You played so well. The way you played the middle section of the C sharp minor mazurka, my grandmother said Friedman used to play it that way. Oh, this isn't just sort of, oh, you play so well, or you have
right.
Can wow, they're listening. It's really thrilling. As a matter of fact, in those days, you actually had to repeat your performance at another hall the next day because the overflow crowd was so great. And of course, you can also say it was the times of communism, of socialism. No, that's a landline. Just ignore it; it'll go away. Reality
or not.
Yeah, no, it'll go away. And it was the times of communism, so there were only 2 channels on TV, so they weren't in a rush to get home to watch TV and be entertained. It was basically socialist news and a boy in his tractor, or how to plant potatoes or something. I mean, it wasn't the riveting kind of stuff we had.
Was Chopin a kind of opening into European culture through the eyes of the Poles for you?
Yes, very much. Although, of course, by age 22, I had won other competitions, including the Busoni in Italy, and I was very much of an international Europhile.
Right.
I wouldn't call myself a Euro snob then, but I probably was when I was a teenager. I mean, in high school, I was listening to Das Lied von der Erde and reading, Matt Zauberberg's Magic Mountain, so I regular little geeky snob,
Have you been back to the Chopin to judge or be part of the other competitions?
Once I was invited always, but it is 3 weeks and it's not easy work. I did in 2015 when the South Korean song Cho Sung-jin won, and who was brilliant. It was hard work, and it's very, I don't know if you've judged, but it can be both frustrating and fascinating.
I'm not a big fan of vocal competitions. I would rather work with my young colleagues to get them ready for the vocal. I don't believe you can lose a vocal competition. You can only win it. And it's pretty hard to sit there and give a number to a young singer when I know in a half an hour I can raise that number at least 1 digit, if not 2. So I just really prefer to participate with my young colleagues. I have been invited a couple of times for other music competitions, but again, for instance, the Mahler Bamberg competition in Germany. But like you say, it's 2.5 weeks long, and it's a whole bunch of time. And maybe I would like to do it once. I think it'd be interesting, but I haven't. I would just rather teach and sing at this point. So that's so back to Chopin, back to, well, so all of this Chopin made it, but at the same time, I mean, one of the things you're known for is this amazing breadth of repertoire. And is this happening at the same time as you're finding yourself focusing in on Chopin, and like you said, the Busoni, who is one of my amazing passions. I think Ferruccio Busoni is one of the great intellects and masters of of all art that has somehow drifted into the back seats and back benchers of major composers. I'm sure you feel the same way. I don't know why Busoni is not just front and center, quite frankly, to any questions of aesthetic or why we do what we do, or the seriousness with which it's connected. I don't understand that. I just and I don't even pretend to be smart enough or trained enough musically to understand all of his facets. But it's just a breathtaking, in my opinion, breadth of musicality and ability.
Yeah, I could not agree more. My very first piano teacher was a student of Busoni, an important Busoni student. So I had
Petri.
She was Frida van Dier, and she was a Dutch pianist in London.
Was she a student of Egon Petri?
No, she was a student of Busoni himself.
Busoni himself. Oh God.
So that goes way back. I mean, yes, and apparently a pianist and musician of huge importance. Frida was, and so I've had the lore of Busoni. See, my first teacher gave me something. Speaking of all the things we've been speaking, was the idea that playing the piano is more than about playing the piano. It's about making music. Making music is about communication of things which are larger than oneself. They are, and how he was able to communicate that to me, I don't know. But he also, he introduced me to so much music which wasn't piano music, symphonic change and vocal. He felt the unity of music and the unity of music in the larger culture without getting preachy about it. He just was that. So I just assumed, that everybody felt that way. Yeah, so Busoni, yes, I couldn't agree. You sang Dr. Faust, didn't you?
I did sing Dr. Faust, and I've sung a handful of his songs.
Wow.
As well. I mean, they're really quite, I mean, they're just,
I think he's very
amazing.
And well, not to answer your question, we didn't ask for an answer, but I think one of the problems with Busoni is the fact that he was able to write in so many languages musically. When you see the name Busoni, it could be neoclassic, it could be neo-romantic, it could be even virtually atonal. And he commits the cardinal sin of ending many of his works soft. And as we know, don't get the big applause line. He does not play to the gallery. I think that's fair.
No, he doesn't. I love his writing on music and art. It's just, it's a slow read, and it should be a slow read. You should just read a couple sentences and sit there and go, let me think about that. It's just, I don't know, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. I want to, ladies and gentlemen, what I love to do in these conversations, let's just briefly, I'm going to do a screen share. First, here's my screen share, and I'm going to I have to check these boxes. Then we're going to go into, where are we going to go into? We're going to go into Safari. Here we are, I've got it. I'm on a Mac. So you should be seeing my screen with Garrick Ohlsson and his discography, which is quite extensive. And our good friend from last week, Michael Sisson Thomas, I just howled when I saw that you did all the Gershwins with Michael. By the way, have you ever done the MacDowell concerto?
I never have. Oddly enough, I've played about 90 concertos so far, and I have not done the MacDowell. Well, really, the second is the one that one plays.
Yeah, the second. Yeah, right.
Good piece.
It's a wonderful piece. I've always loved it. I'm not a pianist. I'm just a pianist fan. But I was just wondering, maybe we should just go, well, looky here. Here's some Frédéric Chopin. There's two reasons, my method to my madness here. So we go down here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly how you handle yourself and I'm on the website, not on the app. But if you're on the app on your iPhone or your Android or your iPad or your computer, and this is the browser, this is what you'd be doing. And so we're going to look at Chopin. We've got him up here. We're going to go down here just to be fun. We're going to push on anything. We've got the Polonaise. Now, what's really fun about this window is that if you go over here on these little ellipses, you see a save to collection or add to a playlist. And if I add to a playlist, it'll open a window and I can create a playlist. These are a couple of playlists that I have here, but this is the easiest way. You could just make an Ohlsson playlist and then put it in create playlist and add, and you click away, come back here. That's one. Now this chevron, you could push this and you'd hear it. But I love this about IDAGIO's platform. And we're going to listen a little bit to this Polonaise in C sharp minor simply by accident, because we're going to push and we're going to hear Garrick Ohlsson play. But what's fun is when we ignite this cut from here, you'll see what happens. Now I'm going to stop it. I haven't started yet. You see all this over here. This is quite fun for the aficionado and the user of IDAGIO. These are all the other recordings in the IDAGIO database of that piece, with some of your favorite pianists, and certainly pianists you've never heard of and so forth. I just find this, for students, it's fantastic. I just love this sort of dropping the needle and have fun. Let's have a listen to Polonaise. Right. Just, we can't take a lot of time, but just have some music for a minute. That is so cruel. That is so cruel. That is so, I apologize, but we want to move on. Clearly, ladies and gentlemen, you need to drop your needle in this incredible human being. Chopin and Garrick Ohlsson is a wonderful mixture. I mean, just do it. It's fantastic. I've been dropping the needle all afternoon, and like I said, I've known so many recordings. I'm babbling. Going to what if you read about Garrick Ohlsson? What shows up a lot is your tone. People talk about, critics love to talk about the tone, or even just normally, like to say, it's an extraordinary thing that comes out of the piano when he plays. And for some of us who think, oh, well, that's because he plays a Steinway, or no, he should play a Bissendorf, oh, my Diama, they all go all to the banal instrument kind of thing. What is that something that not just you work on, but that one learns? Is that an old school thing? Is that because of how you want to make things sound, and that's what the result is, this resonant, beautiful, long line breathing? I mean, I listen to you and I can hear you singing as a kid. I believe it totally. What does that world mean for somebody like me who doesn't play the piano or know?
Wow, I wish I could give you an answer, but of course I'm going to try. Number one, I know, and you know from your vast experience, that there's a funny thing about our friends, the conductors, how a conductor, without doing anything except giving a downbeat and continuing, can actually change the sound of an orchestra. It's almost like an emanation. So, okay, that's the mystical part of it.
Right.
Everybody sits down, because I remember one conductor's wife saying to me, she said, I've heard you on a Steinway, I've heard you on a Yamaha, I've heard you on a Bechstein, I've heard you on a Bosendorf, she said, but you always sound like you. Now that's, really strange. The way you put tones together on a piano, one tone is not different no matter who plays it. I mean, what's different is the loudness. It's the way you connect them, which has to do with a lifetime of learning, your talent, I think your teachers. Yes, it is an old world thing. All my teachers were tone maniacs. Starting from my first teacher, this wonderful Englishman, who basically, since I was a talented kid and I was with him from age 8 to 13, was don't bang. because young boys bang.
Yeah.
They like
Yeah. Don't bang. Yeah.
Don't bang. But what does banging mean? And it's not just loud or careless or crude. It's what does it mean about tones in relationship to one another? And my teacher, Gordinsky at Juilliard, and Rosina Levine and Olga and Arau were all insisting, not always in the same way, by the way. Teachers don't always agree as to how to do it, but about the integrity of tone. I mean, one of the things that distinguishes any good piano teacher is that if you want to make resonance on the piano, those little piccolo notes up there don't have much resonance. They go, but the real resonance comes from the bass. And the bass creating resonance will support the sharpness of the melody without it being so harsh. But this is, as I say, it is a lifetime study. And ultimately, I think it does come down to that mystical, it's the sound you want to make or can make or whatever. And it is so extraordinary, at these competitions, when you hear sometimes in the same morning 4 people on the same Steinway.
And it's completely different.
And there's just 3 minutes in between each one. You could almost swear that they switched instruments.
Wow.
Like, oh my gosh. And it's a strange thing. It's not just the volume or the presence. It's a bit like that thing which is so important in singing too, is projection. Projection doesn't just mean loud, although loud is a good thing.
No, you're right. I mean, projection in singing, it has one of my favorite pet peeves are some of these words that come up. And one, I often jokingly say, voices don't project, they resonate. Broomsticks thrown in anger are projectiles.
Yes.
Voices, it's this whole sense, it's, there's primary tone and there's resonating tone. And that's why it's called resounding tone. And for a singer, that's far more a property of, legato, and this binding of notes is much more a property of continued resonance. One the same way that you're banging on the piano, you hear kids, you hear people all the time come out and assail the piano, and it's quite impressive, but it's not particularly musical in speaking.
Exactly right. And it's one of the paradoxes, because one of the things Chopin said was you have to be supple. In other words, you don't be just strong, you have to be supple. We know this from sports medicine, that you have to be strong and flexible. It's not just,
if I may, also this flexibility. I mean, we could hear that in the Polonaise that we just listened to, just a random example. But that's something that Chopin, I think, why pianists love him, but everybody loves Chopin because it's so musical. If you just played him straight, like the notes on the page, it'd be abominable. If you can, you can't get away with it, but you hear in Mozart or especially Schubert, this literal sort of what he wrote these notes like this and the 2 against 3 and so forth. But when you actually hear somebody say the statement of the phrase and the phraseology, and quite frankly, that is one of the most extraordinary, beautiful things about the very few Schubert things that I found on your discography. You play Schubert with this will to express, and I just, I've become this Schubert maniac in my old years, and I spend so much time with my young colleagues working on Schubert and run a Schubert class in Berlin and all that. It's just it's a remarkable story, Mr. Schubert, and a remarkable ability. But you can't play him like a typewriter. It's not just notes. And I think that's one of the things that maybe Chopin later, where Schubert was streaming in a self-consciousness, but a stream of consciousness sort of way, so much of what the 19th century would be about. You know, without Schubert, Wagner would have never come up with this chord, his Tristan chord. Schubert minus one note in the Faust duet is the Tristan chord. It's an extraordinary thing, and I think that somebody, Mr. Chopin, showed up and took everybody at their word and said, no, it really is about the human spirit being musical, and it sounds like this on a piano. And thank God, and he's sort of taken us on. I mean, nobody played like Chopin before Chopin, did he?
I don't think so. And
Yeah, but exactly.
I'm going to quote everything you said, and of course, I want to make you chief music critic everywhere.
Yeah, that's my destiny.
No, actually, do what you do, but you know, it's just
I could never be a critic because I actually like to talk about music. Ooh, I'm going to get some email on that one, but never mind. So look, we've got a few minutes remaining. Your calendar has been torn apart like everybody else's. I noticed that you were one of my other wonderful young colleagues in the younger generation of musicians that I admire so much as Kirill Gerstein. And I saw this project together. What was that? What is that going to be? What happens? What do you guys do? One of you dances and the other one plays, or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, one dances and plays the tambourine. You know how it is.
Yeah, exactly.
No, castanets, right? We were supposed to have done a duo piano tour in North America in October, November, and we're still trying to see if we can save any of it. The way that everything is subject to change. For example, one organization said, we've got 3 plans. We'd like to do the concert for people if it's allowed, even socially distanced. Number 2, we'd like to do a live streaming. Number 3, we'd like to postpone it to next year. So everybody's facing the same dilemmas. So right now, it looks like Kirill and I may, but it's only a may get together, have rehearsals, and we may do at least a streaming, which a number of the organizations which were going to present us may share and co-sponsor. But watch this space because we don't know. And the whole
bring it to IDAGIO. Bring it to IDAGIO.com. Let us all stream it together. It's just what will be the repertoire? Is it all just 4-hand stuff, or do you do a little bit of ping pong?
Well, it's not 4 hands. It's actually 2 pianos, which we planned originally. And of course, in this days of social distancing, you know, two Steinway concert grands end to end the way you do in 2 pianos, you're more than 2 meters apart. So it's okay. The program is actually, you'll particularly like it. It's a little highbrow. It's got the Busoni Duettino Concertante after a piece of Mozart.
But of course.
The Rachmaninoff Symphonic Dances, which is a transcription of Rachmaninoff's great last symphonic work.
Right.
But the transcription is by Rachmaninoff himself, so it's not an arrangement by a third party. Then the Busoni Fantasia Contrapuntistica and Ravel La Valse. So there's a lot of transcriptions involved, but they're all approved by the composers, and it's a killer program. And I hope we get to do it this fall. And I hope we get to stream it if we don't get to play it. And I hope that if we don't get to do those things, that we can do it next season. Because
I hope I can be around it sometime. It would just be I'd love to see you two playing this. Be wonderful. What a wonderful mixture.
We will certainly be in touch with IDAGIO just to see if there might be a possibility.
It'll be a lot of fun. Now, I have 3 questions because I don't want to keep you on. I know you need to go. You're very involved in so-called avant-garde music. In other words, music of our century, of our time. Is that true, or am I?
No, well, I like to think it's true. I haven't done as much or even enough lately. The next project I have is to be with the Boston Symphony with a piano concerto by the American composer Justin Della Gioia. But I've done a lot of premieres. Put it this way, among the famous pianists, I've not done nearly as much as Peter Serkin. Nobody has. Right. I've done almost as much as Pollini, and then I'm sort of in a middle third place. So I've premiered concertos and solo works regularly. Probably I can come up with a list of a couple of dozen, some of which have had some significance in the larger world, and some of which have gone on to obscurity, like all premieres. But of course, while you do them, you love them.
Okay, second question, into American music. One of my favorite records of yours, because I'm such an American music crazy guy, is the Charles Griffiths. Yay. This is just, I love this guy. I love this guy, his German leader, his American leader, his French melody. His story is tragic, on beautiful on the other side. But was this just a labor? Did somebody propose it to you, or why you, Charles Griffiths?
Well,
30 seconds.
I had no special connection with Griffiths, but it was just one of those coincidences in having a somewhat successful career. The artist and repertory guy at Hyperion Records said, "I'd love for you to record the Griffiths Sonata, which is a great piece." He said, "Not just because you're an American." He said, "I think you do a wonderful job." And he said, "We'd also like more Griffiths, so have a look at." So I looked at virtually all the piano music and recorded a great chunk of it. So on a Hyperion CD. Yes, the sonata is great and important. There's a lot of other great works. I wouldn't say every single, I mean, of course, the White Peacock is the most famous piece on that CD, and that is an unquestioned masterpiece, but you'll discover at least a half dozen other equal masterpieces, and nothing that falls below grade A minus. So in other words, there are no curiosities on that disc. It's all really beautiful.
Did you look at his leader, his songs?
Unfortunately, I did look, but unfortunately, I have not been able to do them with anybody. But who knows if life is long enough?
We have a date. I'm coming to San Francisco. We're gonna have wine and pizza or something, and look at Griffith's magnificent songs. You will love it. It'd be great fun. Now, apropos, but go wider than are you passionate about American music? I mean, you've done some of the big, the Gershwins, and you've done some other concertos. We talked about McDowell. Is American? You've done Beach, which is quite wonderful, H.H. Beach. But American music, did anybody kind of start trying to get you more passionate about that?
No, I have to say, I'm very interested, and I, of course, am somewhat passionate about it, not to the degree you are, but it's part of general musical culture in general. In other words, yes, I am American, and I like the fact that it's American, but the music itself, there is so much American music, and it has to appeal to me on whichever level. So the Beach Quintet is a masterpiece, actually, full stop. The other American pieces I've done, mostly the famous guys, Copland, Gershwin, but I've also done a lot of, American composers, Charles Warren and Louis Weingarten, Justin De La Joya earlier, and the names are all escaping from my head, but I can come up with a large list. Yes, for premieres, I've prejudiced, preferred Americans if possible, because I'm an American, but not exclusively.
No, I get that. You've mentioned two labels, or we're going to mention two labels that I want to give a shout out, and they do have an extensive amount of their label on IDAGIO. IDAGIO is an aggregator. IDAGIO is a platform. It's not a record company, which is very important. Although you can record for just yourself to the label. That was one of the geniuses of the invention of the platform, to get artists and public as close as possible, and also the revenue stream. If you have a project and you want to record it, you can sell it directly or have it available directly on the IDAGIO platform and not have a middleman. But beside that, Bridge Records and Hyperion Records are quite large companies now and have really some of the most exciting catalogs of modern recording companies today. They've just been dedicated to recording the edges of repertoire as well as mainstream, but really keeping the subject matter of various composers, known or not well known, alive and vibrant in their catalog. Hyperion is one of the great singing catalogs in the market today. It's just extraordinary what they have up there. I love the company. I did some Schubert work with Graham Johnson, but I've always just admired the company enormously. Is that good with you? We're going to go. Anything about jazz? Anything you want to say about jazz? And is jazz on your radar?
Not particular, though I like it. So
there you go.
Anyway. Thanks so much. It's been a great pleasure and an honor.
Gary, great meeting you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to sign off. It's 1954 over here anyway, 7:54. 55-minute conversation with one of the great artists of our time, Garrick Ohlsson. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thanks.